Well, another burning issue in Nigeria is the issue of electricity supply and tariff. And the chairman of the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, Mr. Garba Sanusi, had refuted reports of an increase in electricity tariff, which came to effect since December 2021, saying that there was no new hike to the tariff. The chairman says that the agency has not approved a new tariff, but the report has given the impression that it's a recent increase. Well, NERC on its website on Thursday, the 5th of May, published a review of a tariff increase for 6 distribution companies with effect from December 2021. Well, to help us delve and understand these issues, the issue of tariff, of course, versus the issue of electricity supply in Nigeria, which is not a new conversation, I must add. We have the partner at ALEX, Mr. Shina Sipasi, joining us now for this conversation. Good morning, Mr. Sipasi. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Good morning, Nini, and thank you for the invitation too.
Great. So I think let's just be real now. In the past, say from January till date, have you noticed an increase in your electricity tariff?
Yes. So there has been an increase. The increase became immediately noticeable when the February tariff was paid. That was when the increase became instantly noticeable, at least in the area where I stay. But of course, it has always been in the news all over the nation that consumers have noticed that there has been some increase, albeit slight, in their electricity tariff.
Yeah, so I believe the provisions of the electricity power sector reform allows for minor tariff review every 6 months. And especially now, I mean, we just talked about the airlines. They are complaining of increase in jet fuel. Operational cost has gone up everywhere. So should we be having this discussion, even though the NERC boss there has said there's no increase? But I believe that when you fill your card and you load it to your meter, you notice that you don't have the same units that you used to have even before now. But I mean, operational cost is up, inflation is up everywhere, FX challenge is there. So is it justified if there's an increase at this time?
So the issue of increase should be something that consumers should get used to. And I think it is important for consumers to understand exactly how the tariff mechanism works. Just like you have mentioned, there's expected to be a review twice in a year, every 6 months. And the reason for this are exactly the macroeconomic indices that you have mentioned: inflation, interest rate, and so on and so forth. So as long as those keep changing, these are critical inputs. I mean, these are critical inputs that go into the electricity supply chain. As long as those keep changing, we're going to have a situation where there will be increases. Now, the way the system is designed is that if the changes are reduction, if the changes in the macroeconomic factors indices are tending towards reduction, what will we experience also is a reduction in the electricity price. Now, concerning the comment by NEC that it has not increased electricity price, well, I think that is employing a bit of sophistry there, because really there has been an increase. Yes, it could be argued that the order that allows the increase had been signed since the 29th of December 2021. It was expected, the order came into force in January 2022, and then the actual increase took effect from February 2022. So in that sense, the fact that they're just publishing the other on their website does not mean that the increase or the authorization for increase just occur. That authorization for increase is something that had happened since December. And I think it is a way of crisis management process that they have decided to issue the order in December, but they didn't release it. But somehow everybody noticed an increase in their prices, as from February. So it's quite an interesting way to do it. And perhaps that is the way they think they could manage the protest or the crisis that may attend the increase in the tariff. But there has been an increase.
So I guess that also points to the issue of the rights of consumers. Is it compulsory for consumers to be informed before there's an increase? Or, I mean, do consumers just start calculating that since the ad says every 6 months, we should expect a review, even though the review doesn't necessarily mean it should be an increase, it should be a reduction at some point. I don't know how that will happen. But, I mean, do consumers have rights to be informed, or they have already been informed, by the provisions?
Absolutely. The consumers definitely have rights to be informed. But the issue is that who is responsible to make this information available? So there are two ways to look at it. There's a responsibility that is that of NEC, that is the regulator. There's a responsibility that is that of the DISCO. If the DISCO is going to effect any change, the DISCO is duty bound to inform its consumers that this change will happen, and then they can give explanation for the change. Now, the responsibility of NEC, when NEC is doing any review, for instance, when the DISCO, before this review happened, when the DISCO submitted their proposal for their performance improvement plan, when they submitted it, there was actually a public forum that was organized by NEC. And this public forum is open to every consumer. Everybody could have attended it. This public forum was widely publicized. So that was NEC's statutory obligation, and NEC has fulfilled that statutory obligation. So NEC really doesn't directly owe the consumer the duty to come and start informing each consumer that this will be your electricity price, because NEC is not in direct relationship with the consumer. The party that is in direct relationship with the consumer is the DISCO. And the DISCO really ought not to have effected the increase without adequately informing their consumer. And they can do that through their website. They can do that through adverts that they place on TVs and on other media. They can do that by displaying it in the different offices and in the different centers where people load their token. All this can be done. So it is really the responsibility of the DISCO, and I think it is wrong for the DISCO not to have done sufficient education for the consumers about the increase.
So failure to do that, which is the case here now, what can a consumer do? Because you still require the power. You cannot say, oh, I will not work with you anymore as a DISCO. You don't have alternatives. If you're in, for instance, in Lagos, if you're in Ikeja, you're in Ikeja. If you're in Eko, you're in Eko, and there's really nothing you can do about it.
So what the consumer can do is what we are doing right now. That distribution company, you have not met your obligation. You are expected to. Now, we cannot say the remedy is not that the increase should not take effect, because the increase is indexed to a pricing system. So you cannot say that the increase should not take effect, but we can engage in serious advocacy to ensure that the DISCO do what they can do. The fact that we're talking about it, the fact that people are complaining to NEC, we also wake up NEC to that responsibility of ensuring that the DISCO does sufficient customer education before another increase takes place. Because whether we like it or not, in the next 6 months, if you look at the order that NEC had published, in the next 2 months, and sometime by the beginning of 2023, there will be another increase, no matter how minor. There will be, and that is based on the way they have calculated things. And if you're looking at the macroeconomic indices, even what we have today, you will see that if NEC does another review in the next 6 months, there will be another increase. So there's a need for the DISCO to constantly engage. And as long as the DISCO constantly engage, the customers will know that in the same way the prices of everything is rising, the input factors into the production of electricity that I enjoy is also increasing, and then they will expect it to increase. And then they can even begin to have reasonable expectation about the quantum of this increase. But I do agree, it is just not nice for us to get to the place where we're going to load our token or our meter and find out that now, can anybody go to court about it? You can go to court about almost everything, but that is not likely. That is not likely to achieve much because there are a lot of technical and legal issues surrounding that. That is not likely to achieve much. But I also know that it is not going to stop the implementation of the tariff. And let me even go a bit further.
Yeah.
Even if there's a court pronouncement that allows the tariff to be stopped, is just going to be a temporary victory because almost shortly thereafter, they're going to go back to it. They will not just only go back to it, they will claw back, because that is how the mechanism works. They will claw back some of the things they ought to have billed you when you made the court suspend the bill. So eventually, it's still a bill that will be paid one way or the other.
All right, so that means that in the next maybe June, July, Nigerians should expect another review of the tariff. But I think from conversations I've had with some Nigerians, the problem might not really be the review of the tariff. It might be, do we even get the supply? Am I paying for what I'm enjoying? Or is the law just covering, the review of the tariff and not looking at the supply, what I should be enjoying?
In fact, that is a very, very valid concern. That is a very, very valid concern. The truth is that, it has been the experience of the general populace, my experience, of course, that although the tariff is increasing, the supply is not there. Even where we have been told that there's a service-based tariff, most of us who are on service-based tariff, and perhaps your experience may be different, and you can say that, most of us who are on service-based tariff, we do not enjoy the number of hours that we are expected to enjoy. Now, the issue is that there's a system to track that. And that system to track that is a system that we must be willing to implement and enforce. So, in order to maintain a particular customer on a particular tariff, the rule is that the average supply to that customer over a period of 2 months will be checked. And how do you check the average supply to a cluster of customer? You check the average supply to a cluster of customer through the 11 kVA feeder located closest, 11 kVA feeder from where that cluster of customer is being served. So if I am living, for instance, in Shangotedo, and Shangotedo is, let's say, on band D, and band D is expected to get an average of maybe 12 to 14 hours of electricity. It is up now to the consumer to take it up with their local distribution district to say that, look, the hours of power I have received over the past 2 months does not correspond to the service band on which you are placing me on. And as long as you can show that, you actually can make, there are a procedure for applying to the DISCO to take corrective action, either downgrade the cluster to the right tariff, or supply more power to that cluster. And if the DISCO does not respond, there's an escalation process that can be undertaken to escalate the complaints to the regulator, to MEC, the regulator.
Yeah, well, it looks like there's a lot of enlightenment that has to be done, even to members of the public, because a lot of people, I'm not sure, are aware of these processes. And I guess once the system realizes that nobody's holding them, questioning and asking for their rights, then there's bound to be abuse of that. Just before we let you go, Mr. Chikasi, have you heard the probability of banks taking over some discos, over 860 billion naira debts? Some of the banks that sponsored the discos.
So that probability is there. In fact, let's not use the word probability. That possibility is there because the acquisition of the discos are financed through acquisition loan. And when they were financing them, the shareholders of this disco gave asset debentures and so on and so forth. They gave some asset debentures. And by virtue of these asset debentures, the banks, in an indirect way, can take over the discos if they take enforcement step. And I know that many of those loans are in arrears. So it is a possibility that is there. The reason why it has not happened, has been because there has been a constant restructuring of the loan. And there has always been appeal by the government to allow certain government intervention in the electricity business to take effect. But it is not a probability. There's a distinct possibility that it can happen if the banks get to the point where they can't take it anymore. They have every right, legally and by their documentation with the bank, to take enforcement action.
If you could just do this in just a few seconds, what would that mean for the industry, for the issue of tariff, the issue of supply? What would it mean?
It will not change the problem of tariff, neither will it change the problem of supply. What will change is that what will change will be the ownership of the disco.
All right.
What will change will be now whether the new owners are able to inject the needed fund that can be used to expand and make the operation more efficient. Whether their approach will be different.
That will be another story.
Time will tell that, yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Shina Shukasi, partner at ALEX. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us this morning. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much.